On the 24th of January 1948, inside of a Polish prison's execution chamber, a ruthless and barbaric guard who worked inside of the deadliest concentration camp of the Second World War was led to his noose. There were many different ropes dangling from the ceiling of this room, and alongside this notorious brute were many other former guards of Auschwitz who were to be executed with him. Herbert Paul Ludwig was one man who seemed to enjoy the sadistic approach he took to his work inside of Auschwitz, and he was someone who was regularly seen battering and brutalising the prisoners of the work detachments that he watched over. He regularly battered inmates, sometimes to death, but at the end of the war he was one of a number of former concentration camp guards who were brought to trial, but many more were never brought to a courtroom for their actions. Welcome to The Untold Past. Today we look at the execution of the ruthless guard of Auschwitz, and to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Herbert Paul Ludwig was born on the 16th of October 1904 inside of Grisbach, and little is known about his early life, but like most of the concentration camp guards, there was little in his upbringing to state that one day he would become one of the most evil war criminals in history, responsible for the deaths of thousands. Ludwig had an ordinary job during the 1930s, but from 1932 he signed up, like thousands of other people did, to join the Nazi Party. At this time, Hitler was beginning his rise to power, and within a year he would become the Chancellor of Germany, and he promised to restore national pride in the nation that had been shattered by the defeat of the First World War. Hitler also promised better employment opportunities, as well as to provide everyone with food and bread, and to bring an end to the crisis with the economy and starvation. Previously, Germany had experienced huge issues with hyperinflation, but Hitler and the Nazis sought to bring an end to this. But Herbert Ludwig went further in his devotion to the Nazi Party. He became a member of the SS, Heinrich Himmler's paramilitary organisation, that would begin life as a small bodyguard unit, tasked with looking after Hitler at political meetings and rallies. These were different from the SA, the brown shirts, and initially were noticeable by their different uniforms, but they were tasked with ensuring that there were no threats to Hitler's life and also other senior Nazi leaders. But then when Heinrich Himmler became the Reichsführer SS, or the head of the SS, he would transform them into a huge paramilitary group who were incredibly feared. The SS would of course go on to become one of the most feared and ruthless groups in history, and they were the men and women who staffed the concentration camps and served as a guard staff on many different sites, especially following the German army's occupation of different countries during World War II. Herbert Paul Ludwig was then sent to go and train as a concentration camp guard inside of Oranienburg concentration camp. This was an early site which was one of the first opened by the Nazis in Prussia following their gaining of power. It held mostly political prisoners and opponents of Hitler, such as communists who came from Berlin, and also a number of people that the Nazis deemed as undesirable. Many other guards trained here before they were moved to other camps. However, in Poland there was an SS official who was inspecting a site for its suitability for the creation of a new concentration camp. Rudolf Höss was the commandant of Auschwitz, who created the site, and he developed a former barracks to become the deadliest site of slaughter inside of the Third Reich. Höss began his development of Auschwitz based on the belief that he wanted to do things differently, and he also wanted to create the deadliest and most efficient site of death and extermination that he could. With the expansion of Auschwitz, Höss needed many more guards to go and work at his camp, and many people like Herbert Paul Ludwig were brought to Auschwitz to work in different aspects of the camp. Auschwitz was the place where over 1.1 million people died within the barbed wire fences. Ludwig served there from 1940 to January 1945, when he left with a transport of prisoners heading towards Gusen, but throughout these years he developed a reputation for being a ruthless and barbaric overseer who was not afraid to carry out torture and execution on a daily basis. Ludwig worked as a guard of the prisoner commando, who were in charge of feeding animals held at the site. In this role he was overseeing those people who were looking after farm animals, and what was striking was that these animals, such as pigs, were fed a lot better than those actual prisoners within Auschwitz. It was Ludwig's job to punish those people who were caught stealing food, which was intended for the animals, and some even went to the gallows at roll call for this, which was considered a serious rule break within Auschwitz, even when people were eating any morsel of food just to survive. He also worked as a guard overseeing farming detachments of workers and prisoners, and also as a block Führer, and he was placed in charge of a block and was known for carrying out disciplinary actions and punishments of those men under his control. Many prisoners later testified about his brutality, and they noted how Ludwig patrolled with a whip and a stick, and how he was not afraid to turn on people inside of his command, and he was regularly seen battering victims and prisoners every single day. But one of the most horrific jobs that he performed inside of Auschwitz was that he was involved in the selections that occurred at the camp. When thousands of new prisoners arrived at Auschwitz on railway boxcars, SS guards and doctors, as well as senior officials, patrolled the yards, and they then decided on who would be admitted into the camp and who would not. The elderly, and also many women with their children, were sent to one side, and they were then to be taken to their executions inside the gas chambers of Auschwitz. Many people who took part in these selections were later executed for their crimes, and specifically this, as they decided who would live and who would die, and regularly played God with people's lives. But Herbert Paul Ludwig took part in these selections of prisoners, sending the sick and elderly, as well as many children, to the gas chambers. He was also seen during this time beating and kicking prisoners, forcing them to go to their destination quicker, with more speed, so that more prisoners could be exterminated in less time. At the end of the Second World War, many SS guards tried to make a run for it, and tried to escape any form of punishment. A number of them did manage to do this, and have died in the years after, in relative quiet, but some former guards of Auschwitz were arrested and were brought to trial. Herbert Paul Ludwig was one of those, and he was then extradited to Poland to stand as a defendant in the first Auschwitz trial. He stood in front of the Supreme National Tribunal in Krakow, and the courtroom heard of his terrible treatment of prisoners in the camp. They also learned of his actions with regards to sending prisoners to their deaths in the gas chambers. It was obvious what the sentence would be for him, and Ludwig was then condemned to death for crimes against humanity. He was sent to Montelupich prison in Krakow to await his death sentence, but he would not have to wait too long, as just over a month after his last date in court, he was summoned from his prison cell to make the short walk to the execution chamber. He was accompanied by guards, and Herbert Paul Ludwig was then taken into the chamber of death, and he noticed a number of meat hooks on the ceiling, as well as the nooses secured to them, and boxes underneath. He was led up to a noose, and a Polish executioner worked quickly, and secured this around his neck. There was no black cap placed over his head, and the executioner worked quickly, and as soon as the noose was tight around his neck, the stool was kicked out, and Herbert Paul Ludwig was executed, slowly strangling to death. There were a number of guards of Auschwitz who were executed that day inside the execution chamber, and Herbert Ludwig was one alongside the former commandant of the deadly camp, Arthur Lieber-Henschel, who was executed, and he was executed actually after Maria Mandel, the beastly female guard. He was someone who was responsible for the deaths of thousands who were marched towards the gas chambers, and he was seen by other prisoners driving these victims into their deaths quicker, and raining down blows with his weapon and whip. Ludwig was at the age of 43 condemned inside of a Polish prison for his actions, and he is today a forgotten executed guard of Auschwitz. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.